wilding tree to the uninformed might seem pretty, but in actual fact, it's a cancer in our biodiversity because they just spread so quickly and they're so aggressive. Some people have got a problem that they can't afford to control.
As New Zealanders, we're quite used to seeing plantation forestry, so people often don't differentiate between a planted pine tree and a wilding, which is one that's seeded itself. And with wildings, for the first 10 or 20 years, you don't perceive a lot of change. There's just these young ones start to appear in a landscape that's so big you don't even notice them. But by the time you realise you've got a problem and it's starting to really join up, the cost of removing them is really significant. They do ultimately just cover everything.
We're here in a nice red tussock and grey scrub ecosystem here in the Mackenzie Basin. It's one of a range of ecosystems that we have in the basin. They're home to hundreds of different plants and animals, and they all rely on that complexity of the plants and things that grow and live there in order for them to survive. One of the things we find is that because the pine trees intercept rainwater as it falls and they increase evapotranspiration, we get much less water into environments like this. It'll dry out around the margins and the pine trees will take over. We've been in this forest a little while now and we've seen some contorta pine, some larch. There's no diversity at all. It's dark, it's really hard to walk through, the trees are really close together. The floor is covered in a really thick depth of pine needles, making the soil all acidic underneath. There's not any birds around. It's a crushing loss of everything, really. And that's the biggest threat that we see with wilding pines, is it changes it from being a really complex environment and ecosystem to a monoculture of pines.
We've had a wilding pine issue for years, mainly due to the seed source on the north side of us, so it's been coming at us for years. We've been trying to control it for years, and it was just a continuing headache.
Yeah, the time and energy that we were putting into it wasn't keeping up with the problem. So even though we were trying to control the seed source and stop them getting any worse, we weren't ever making any headway. So they were still there and they were still growing.
There was a whole lot of organisations and farmers and community groups working away, battling the spread of wilding pines. But despite that, we were losing ground at around 5% of increase a year, so it's sort of about 90,000 hectares a year was being invaded by wilding conifers.
In 2016, government funding became available for phase 1 of the national program to deal with the wilding conifer issues nationally. Management units were established throughout the country. In Canterbury, we had a number of those, and roughly $6.8 million was allocated to the region to deal with wilding conifers.
The real positive thing is the partnerships. We've got all organisations working for a common goal, and without that, individually, we cannot handle the problem. So collectively, it's doable, and some of the work that's already gone on in the last 3 years has been really, really positive.
We got approached by ECAN in combination with DOC and the MPI funding with the deal of working with these guys to basically zero the whole lot of trees that we had, and to us it just seemed a no-brainer. They engaged the contractor, which we found easy to deal with. It was just such an easy process for us.
And that was the beauty of it. We knew exactly what was going on, we knew what they were going to do, we knew what was hoping to be achieved, and it was made very clear to us from the start what obligations we were going to have, and we knew we were going to be able to get on top of it if we all worked together.
Because of the amount of money that was available, we were able to deal with larger infestations, so massive amounts of ground control. Quite often there's dense infestations on properties. Our first option was always to assess whether there's commercial viability of the timber to offset the costs. This is often driven by species, size and accessibility. And using helicopters to get back into the high country to deal with scattered trees that we wouldn't normally be able to get access to. I think there's roughly 5 to 6 teams, probably anywhere between 10 to 20 guys covering vast amounts of ground.
Quite a unique landscape, this one here. It's a landscape that they're trying to look after for the native lizards, so we don't want to be dropping trees on their habitat. We're not actually felling the larger trees, we're just sort of felling the smaller trees, and then we'll come back and drill and fill to kill the bigger trees standing. They're cutting the tree down to a stump, and then they've got a wee chemical applicator, and they're applying that to the base, so we just a bit of quality assurance just to make sure that stump doesn't grow again. A big part of the wilding program is ensuring that we keep really good, accurate data. The guys are all carrying around a GPS individually and marking the trees that they're cutting down and track logging as well. It's a good way to make sure that everything's done at the end of the day and we've covered all the ground appropriately. The key to success in wildings is keeping the pressure on. Obviously we need to keep the funding at it and keep the crews moving. The moment we let the finger off the pulse, the seedlings seem to catch up behind us pretty quickly.
The good thing with pine trees as opposed to gorse or broom is that the seeds only last in the soil for about 5 years. So after you can do a couple of follow-up controls, you should really have broken the back of the problem. It's actually something you can win.
Over the past 3 years, there has been a significant contribution by the Canterbury region and the high country landowners and community groups. I think that we are starting to get a bit of a foothold in terms of what we're trying to achieve, with over 1.2 million hectares controlled over the past 3 years. It's
getting on towards a third of the affected land we've covered to date. We've focused on a lot of that stuff that was in the early stage of invasion, I guess, so they were the easy areas to control. Some of the expensive work still lies in front of us, those dense closed canopy forests that are much more difficult to control.
I think that the money we've had has done a great job in the sense that we've contained the problem, and we're very grateful as a trust and as a community that at present we're being funded with another 20 odd million over the next 2 years, and that'll make a colossal difference.
We'll have ground contractors working again in those management units to deal with the remaining areas. The techniques are there. It's going forward, as long as we can get the funding to be able to deal with it, it's definitely beatable.
This is an environment that the landowner's been looking after now for quite some time. I'm sure you can see behind me there's a wall of green. So they come through here every 3 years to remove the wilding pines. Otherwise, what we're standing in now would look like that stuff up there. But it's a lovely matrix of red tussock grassland, and you've got wetlands in there as well, and then up on the dry you've got dry scrub areas, so they'll be home to insects and lizards and birds. It's here because it requires constant vigilance by the landowner to keep it here.
Once the guys had been through, which did take a wee while, you sort of would go out and be like, oh, there's no trees on the ridgeline. And when you'd be driving on the road and you can no longer see the trees, it's sort of no longer that blight on the landscape that it was.
We've gone from literally thousands of acres of tree-infested land to now have it at ground zero, not a tree standing. Yeah, it's a pretty proud feeling to know the impact we've had. We feel like it's been a success story.
Yeah, I mean, it was a significant financial contribution from us, but it's a true partnership. It's like, I mean, we did our bit and the other agencies have done their bit as well. It just sort of goes to show that when people work together, you can actually start making real progress, whereas if everyone's just working in their own little silo, you don't get the same results.